The bourbon bottle slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen tile. I'd flown 12 hours to surprise her at the beach house. Girls' weekend, she'd said. Just her and 2 friends. I'd wanted to see her face when I walked in. I'd closed a major deal, secured a partnership that would set us up for life. I wanted to celebrate with the woman I'd promised forever to. Instead, I heard my wife calculating my death. If he vanished, the insurance would clear my debts, she'd said to her friend. 2 million. Plus his brother's always been interested. Finally could date someone who actually excites me. Her friend had laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. My name is Vincent. I'm 39. And in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. My wife wasn't joking. She was planning. I left the bourbon where it fell and walked back out to my rental car. My hands were steady as I drove to the airport. My mind was already 3 moves ahead, not toward revenge yet, but toward survival. Toward understanding what I'd missed. Toward building a case that wouldn't require me to explain why I'd overheard my wife's murder fantasies. By 4 a.m., I was on a flight to Costa Rica. By noon I'd disappeared. And somewhere in that beach house, my wife was probably still sleeping, unaware that I'd heard every word. Unaware that I'd stopped being her husband and become something far more dangerous. A ghost with a plan. I rented a small villa in San Jose under a fake name and started documenting everything. From Costa Rica, I hired a private investigator to monitor my wife's communications. The insurance policy she'd mentioned, I needed copies. The brother she'd referenced, I needed to understand how deep that connection ran. Every conversation, every transaction, every movement that suggested premeditation. The investigator sent me the first report within 72 hours. My wife had increased my life insurance 6 months ago. Doubled the payout. Listed herself as sole beneficiary. She'd done it quietly without telling me, burying the paperwork in a filing cabinet I rarely checked. 6 months meant this wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. I also received recordings of phone conversations between my wife and her friend. They were discussing methods. Poison. An accident. Something that wouldn't look suspicious. They were laughing while they planned it. My wife had been researching life insurance claims online. She'd looked up how long investigations typically took. She'd even checked my brother's social media to see if he was single. She was building a future on my corpse. I transferred half my liquid assets to an offshore account. Not to hide them, I wasn't running from the law. But to protect them from a woman who'd already decided to murder me for money. Then I called my brother. Don't contact me for a while, I told him. And don't be alone with my wife. What? Why? Just trust me. I'll explain everything soon. I hung up before he could ask more questions. By day 5 in Costa Rica, I had everything I needed to bury her. Now I just had to decide how. I sent the first anonymous tip to the police on day 8. A concerned citizen reporting suspicious conversations overheard at a beach house. A woman discussing harming her husband. Insurance fraud. Premeditated planning. All of it documented, all of it deniable, because technically I was just passing along information I'd happened to hear before disappearing. The investigation began quietly. My wife didn't know yet. She was still at home, probably wondering where I was, probably panicking that her plan had been disrupted. She'd likely called the police herself by now, reported me missing. Played the worried spouse perfectly. I watched from Costa Rica as her world started to collapse. The police arrived at our house with questions. They'd received reports about concerning conversations. They wanted to speak with her about life insurance policies. They wanted to see her phone records. They wanted to understand the timeline. She denied everything, of course. Called it a misunderstanding. Said she'd been joking. Said her friend had been exaggerating. Said I was paranoid and controlling, the classic deflection of someone caught in their own trap. But the police don't need proof to investigate. They just need reasonable suspicion. And I'd given them that in spades. My brother called me 3 times. I didn't answer. By the 4th call, he'd figured out I was alive and deliberately unreachable. He left a voicemail. Your wife is freaking out. The police think she tried to kill you. What the hell is happening? Everything I thought. Everything is finally happening. I watched the news articles begin to circulate. Local woman under investigation for insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. Her face plastered across headlines. Her career imploding in real time. She'd wanted to disappear me. Instead, I'd made her disappear. Her sister called on day 14. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up the phone and listen to her sob story about how their family was falling apart. How my wife was having a breakdown. How the police had found nothing concrete but the suspicion had destroyed everything anyway. "Where are you?" her sister demanded. "Why won't you come home and fix this?" "Fix what?" I asked calmly. "Your sister's murder plot?" Silence. "She was planning to kill me," I continued. "She told her friend about the insurance money, about dating my brother. She'd already increased my policy and started researching methods. That's not a misunderstanding. That's premeditated homicide." Her sister started crying harder. "She's having a complete breakdown. She's in a psychiatric hospital. She keeps saying she's sorry, that she didn't mean it, that she was just venting." "People don't casually vent about murdering their husbands," I said. "They plan it." "She planned it." I hung up. But something shifted in me when I heard her sister's voice. Not sympathy, I wasn't capable of that anymore. But recognition that I'd set something in motion that I couldn't stop. My wife was in a psychiatric hospital. Her career was destroyed. Her family was fractured. And I was sitting in a villa in Costa Rica watching it all collapse from a distance. The police eventually closed the investigation. Insufficient evidence. My wife's lawyer had been effective. She'd reframed everything as emotional distress, as a cry for help disguised as dark humor. She'd hired experts to testify about her mental state. She wasn't going to prison. But she was going to live the rest of her life knowing that I'd heard her. That I'd known. That I'd chosen to destroy her rather than confront her. And that knowledge was its own kind of prison. I returned to the United States on day 21. Not to reconcile. Not to face my wife. But to reclaim my life from the wreckage I'd created. The house was mine. The accounts were mine. The future was mine. She was living in her parents' basement, medicated and broken. My brother came to see me the day after I returned. He looked at me with eyes full of questions and confusion. "She was going to kill you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And you just left? Instead of calling the police directly?" "I wanted her to suffer the way she'd planned for me to suffer," I said quietly. "I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have your life taken away." He stared at me for a long moment. "You're not the person I thought you were." "No," I agreed. "I'm not." The divorce was finalized quickly. She didn't fight for anything. Just signed the papers from her parents' house and disappeared further into herself. I kept the house, the accounts, everything. She got a small settlement and the burden of knowing that she tried to murder me and I'd responded by destroying her in return. I started seeing a therapist. Not for redemption. I wasn't naive enough to think that was possible. But to understand why I'd chosen systematic destruction over simple escape. Why I'd orchestrated her downfall instead of just leaving. "You wanted her to know," my therapist said. "You wanted her to feel what you felt when you heard her planning your death." She was right. I'd turned her own weapon against her and called it justice. But justice requires the person to understand what they've done. My ex-wife understood. She understood perfectly. And that understanding had driven her to a psychiatric hospital where she spent her days staring at walls, medicated into numbness. I'd won. But the victory tasted like poison. 6 months after the divorce, my ex-wife attempted suicide again. This time she succeeded. Her sister called me with the news. My ex-wife had taken pills at her parents' house. Left a note. By the time they found her, it was too late. I felt nothing at first. Just a blank space where emotion should have been. Then the weight came, not sadness but understanding. I had orchestrated her destruction so completely that she'd chosen non-existence over living with what I'd done to her. I'd wanted her to suffer. I'd achieved that goal with brutal efficiency. And now she was dead. The note, her sister said, was addressed to me. She'd written about how she understood why I'd done it. How she deserved it. How she couldn't live knowing that the man she'd planned to murder had instead murdered her slowly, systematically, without ever laying a hand on her. I read those words and something broke inside me that I wasn't sure could be repaired. At her funeral, I stood in the back and watched her family grieve. Her parents looked destroyed, not just by her death, but by the knowledge of what she tried to do. Her brother avoided my eyes. Everyone understood that I'd set this in motion. That I'd calculated her destruction and executed it perfectly. My therapist asked me what I was feeling. "Like I'd become the thing I was trying to escape," I said. "Like I murdered her. Just slowly. Without a weapon." She didn't argue with me. I understood then that revenge doesn't end when your enemy falls. It continues, echoing through time, destroying not just the person you intended but everyone connected to them. It poisons the perpetrator most of all, leaves them hollow, capable of witnessing suffering and calling it justice. I'd wanted my wife to understand the magnitude of her betrayal, Instead, I'd become a murderer. Just one that the law couldn't touch. A year after my ex-wife's death, I sold the house. I couldn't live in it anymore. Every room held the ghost of the person I'd been before I heard those words in the beach house. Every corner reminded me that I'd chosen destruction over dignity. That I'd orchestrated a woman's slow descent into madness and called it accountability. I moved into an apartment downtown. Sparse. Empty. A place where I could exist without the weight of my own choices pressing down on me. My brother had stopped speaking to me. Her parents sued for wrongful death, claiming I'd driven their daughter to suicide through emotional abuse and premeditation. The case was dismissed. I hadn't technically done anything illegal. But the verdict didn't matter. I knew what I'd done. I started volunteering at a suicide prevention hotline. Not out of redemption. Out of a desperate need to prevent someone else from becoming what I'd become. A person capable of watching another human being deteriorate and feeling satisfied about it. The work haunted me in ways I couldn't articulate. Each caller who was suicidal, each person at the edge of that cliff, felt like my ex-wife. Each one felt like someone I'd pushed there with my own hands. I received a letter from her parents. They'd kept her last note, the one she'd written to me. They wanted me to read her final words. Not as accusation but as testimony. In it she wrote, "I understand now why you did this. I deserve it. But I can't live knowing that the man I married has become someone capable of this kind of cruelty. I can't live knowing that I made you into this. So I'm leaving. I'm sorry. For everything." Those words destroyed me more than any revenge I could have orchestrated. Because she'd understood at the end that we'd both been casualties in a war neither of us had won. And I was the one left standing in the wreckage. 3 years after my ex-wife's death, I sat in my therapist's office and finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. Can I ever come back from this? She didn't answer immediately. Just looked at me with eyes that had seen too many broken people trying to reassemble themselves. That depends, she said, on whether you're asking for forgiveness or understanding. I didn't know the difference anymore. I'd spent 3 years volunteering at suicide prevention centers. I'd answered calls from people at the edge of cliffs, talked them down, listened to their pain without judgment. I'd raised awareness about mental health. I'd donated the money from the house sale to foundations dedicated to preventing suicide. But none of it brought her back. None of it erased the fact that I'd orchestrated her destruction and called it justice. I'd heard my wife planning my murder and responded by murdering her slowly, stripping away her career, her reputation, her mental health, her will to live. I'd done it all with the precision of someone executing a plan. And I'd justified it as accountability. But accountability requires the person to survive it. To learn from it. To rebuild. What I'd done was eliminate the possibility of any of that. I'd become the very thing I'd wanted to escape. A person capable of ending another human being's life and calling it justified. The irony was that she'd been right in her final note. I had become someone unrecognizable. Someone capable of cruelty masquerading as justice. Someone who'd confused revenge with righteousness. I would never recover from what I'd done. I could only spend the rest of my life trying to prevent someone else from making the same choice I had. That would have to be enough. Because it was all I deserved.